possession. Clark. Oh! From another stratosphere!
Everyone thought the league had finally figured out a secret formula to break her, but they were dead wrong, and the entire basketball world was forced to watch their ultimate master plan crumble on live television. Going into this highly anticipated matchup between the Indiana Fever and the WNBA's newest expansion villain, the Golden State Valkyries, the narrative was already written by critics who desperately wanted to see the young phenom fail in front of a sold-out, hostile crowd. The Valkyries were supposed to be the ultimate kryptonite, a franchise armed with a massive billionaire budget, a state-of-the-art facility at the Chase Center, and a roster deliberately stacked with gritty, hardened veterans who carried massive chips on their shoulders. For months leading up to this game, rumors circulated in the dark corners of professional basketball media that front offices across the country were quietly exchanging notes, colluding on the best physical tactics to exhaust, frustrate, and completely neutralize the face of the new generation. But what was meticulously planned as a brutal burial in the Bay Area miraculously transformed into a breathtaking exhibition of resilience, elite playmaking, and sheer willpower, leaving over 18,000 screaming fans in absolute, stunned disbelief. You have to understand the toxic environment she was walking into, because this wasn't just another random Tuesday night game on the regular season schedule. This was a highly calculated, heavily publicized ambush. When the Golden State Valkyries were first announced as the newest expansion franchise, there were immediate whispers about how their front office was building their roster through the draft and free agency. Instead of focusing on flashy, high-volume scorers or building a modern pace and space offense, insider reports suggested their general manager was singularly obsessed with acquiring defensive bruisers. They wanted enforcers who were known for playing deep in the gray areas of the rulebook, players who wouldn't hesitate to deliver a hard elbow away from the ball or set a screen that felt more like a blindside football tackle. The underlying goal was glaringly obvious to anyone paying close attention to the league's changing landscape. They wanted to establish a terrifying defensive dominance early, and what better way to announce their arrival to the rest of the league than by completely shutting down the most talked-about player in basketball history. Players on the Valkyries had subtly hinted in preseason media scrums and podcast appearances that the era of deep threes and uncontested fast breaks was officially over, placing a massive, neon target on Indiana's back before they even stepped off their charter flight. The tension in the arena that night was so thick you could practically choke on it, with fans packing the stands hours early, clutching their signs, and just waiting to see if the Golden Child would finally crack under genuine, unfiltered pressure. But that heavy anticipation was only a fraction of the actual story playing out behind the scenes. Behind closed doors, the psychological warfare was reaching unprecedented, almost toxic levels. Sources closely connected to the locker room hinted that Indiana's coaching staff had held intense, closed-door film sessions specifically addressing the physical toll this specific game was going to demand from their young star. There were unconfirmed leaks from league insiders suggesting that certain veteran players across the country had been actively texting members of the Valkyries, encouraging them to be unnecessarily rough, to test the referee's boundaries early, and to see exactly how much punishment the officials would actually allow before finally blowing the whistle. It was a classic rite of passage, taken to an extreme, borderline, dangerous level, fueled by a toxic mix of competitive jealousy and a stubborn refusal to hand over the keys to the league. When the two teams finally took the hardwood for pre-game warm-ups, the body language told you absolutely everything you needed to know. There were no friendly exchanges at half-court, no smiling hugs between former college rivals, just cold, unblinking stares, and a mutual, unspoken understanding that this was going to be an absolute dogfight from the opening tip. The sports media machine had spent the entire week aggressively hyping up the physical mismatch, dissecting every possible angle on daytime talk shows, practically begging for a controversial viral moment to splash across their morning headlines. And for the first 15 grueling minutes of the game, it looked exactly like the nightmare scenario those loud critics had gleefully predicted. Golden State came out swinging, implementing a defensive scheme that was borderline predatory in its execution. Every single time Indiana tried to run a simple, standard pick and roll at the top of the key, the Valkyries immediately threw two massive, aggressive defenders at the ball handler, trapping her dangerously close to half court and forcing hurried, chaotic decisions. The physicality was relentless, exhausting, and designed to break her spirit, with hips being aggressively checked on every cut, jerseys being yanked whenever the referees turned their heads, and off-ball screens that resembled offensive line blocks rather than legal basketball plays. It became brutally, infuriatingly clear that the officials had collectively decided to swallow their whistles for the night, intentionally letting both sides play through an insane, dangerous amount of contact that would normally result in immediate technical fouls in any other arena. At one highly contentious point in the first quarter, after a vicious knock to the hardwood that went completely uncalled by the official standing just 3 feet away, the Chase Center crowd erupted into deafening cheers, actively reveling in the visible frustration radiating from the Indiana bench. The Fever found themselves trapped in a terrifying early hole, their normally fluid offense completely stagnant, and the collective body language of the young squad started to visibly deflate under the crushing weight of the Bay Area crowd's hostility. The local broadcast announcers were already starting to write the post-game narrative, claiming that the blueprint to stopping the Phenom had finally been exposed to the world. But if the Valkyries genuinely thought a few hard, illegal screens and some suspiciously uncalled fouls were going to send their opponent packing in tears, they were in for the rudest awakening of their professional careers. Because that wasn't the whole story, and what happened next would permanently alter the dynamic of the entire league. Something dramatic shifted in the final, chaotic minutes of the second quarter. A subtle but undeniable change in the way the game was being processed on the floor by Indiana's star. Instead of continuing to stubbornly force contested shots over double teams or trying to fight through the relentless physical traps with pure brute force, a brilliant tactical adjustment was made that instantly flipped the script on the Valkyries' coaching staff. Recognizing that Golden State was overcommitting entirely to stopping the deep ball and heavily guarding the perimeter, the strategy brilliantly pivoted away from forced scoring and shifted entirely toward surgical, devastating playmaking. It was a breathtaking mental reset, a moment of elite basketball IQ that you simply cannot teach in practice. The logic was beautifully simple, but incredibly difficult to execute. If the Golden State defense wanted to dedicate 2 large bodies to guarding one single player 35 feet away from the basket, that mathematically meant someone else on the court was standing wide open, and the ensuing passing clinic that followed was nothing short of a generational masterpiece. This wasn't just about dumping the ball off in a panic to the nearest teammate to avoid a turnover. This was high-level, grandmaster chess being played in real time against a terrifying defense that suddenly realized, with growing panic, that they were completely out of position. The transition from a struggling, heavily guarded scorer to a lethal, visionary floor general was absolutely seamless, resulting in a staggering 9 assists that completely broke the spirit, rhythm, and confidence of the Valkyries' defensive coordinators. We are talking about absolute, jaw-dropping laser beams threaded perfectly through microscopic passing lanes that didn't even seem to exist. She was throwing no-look, behind-the-back bounce passes that miraculously found cutting teammates perfectly in stride, and perfectly lofted lob passes that seemed to temporarily defy the laws of gravity before dropping gently into the hands of her forwards. Every single time a Golden State defender aggressively stepped up to trap her at the logo, the ball was already out of her hands, flying out of the trap and directly into the waiting hands of a wide-open Indiana teammate for a ridiculously easy, uncontested layup. The mounting frustration on the Valkyries' faces became glaringly obvious to everyone in the building, as they started angrily pointing fingers at each other after every blown rotation, totally confused and demoralized by how their foolproof, highly aggressive defensive scheme was being systematically dismantled by simple basketball geometry and elite court vision. By stubbornly, aggressively collapsing all their resources on the perimeter to stop the three-point shot, Golden State had fatally exposed their interior paint, and they were paying a heavy, embarrassing price on every single possession down the floor. The Indiana bench, which had been quiet and nervous in the first quarter, was suddenly on their feet, waving towels and screaming as they watched their leader completely manipulate the defense like puppets on a string. But completely dismantling them with elite passing was only the first half of the lethal execution. The real, heart-stopping dagger was still waiting to be plunged in the second half. Because once the exhausted, frustrated defense was inevitably forced to adjust their game plan to stop the relentless interior passing attack, they had to nervously back off their double teams just a tiny fraction of an inch to protect the paint. And that tiny, microscopic sliver of daylight was absolutely all it took to ignite a scoring explosion that the Bay Area will never forget. Finishing the legendary night with 22 spectacular points, the offensive takeover in the third and fourth quarters was a breathtaking, cinematic display of pure shooting mechanics, elite footwork, and ruthless, cold-blooded shot selection. The subtle hesitation moves and lethal pump fakes left veteran Golden State defenders literally freezing in their tracks, utterly terrified of giving up yet another easy assist, only to be brutally punished by lightning-fast, unguardable step-back jumpers that splashed flawlessly through the net before they could even raise a hand to contest the shot. The famous deep logo threes made their triumphant, terrifying return, but this time they were not forced out of sheer desperation like in the first quarter. They were pulled smoothly and confidently within the natural flow of an unstoppable offense that had completely, thoroughly demoralized the opposing crowd. The Chase Center, which had been deafeningly loud, aggressive, and hostile in the opening minutes of the game, was tragically reduced to a stunning, nervous silence every single time the ball crossed half-court in the second half. You could literally hear the rubber sneakers squeaking tightly against the hardwood, the heavy breathing of the exhausted Valkyries defenders, and the echoing thud of the basketball as Indiana methodically, ruthlessly erased the early deficit and began building an absolutely insurmountable lead. Each massive three-pointer she hit felt deeply personal, a direct, undeniable answer to the physical abuse, the swallowed whistles, and the arrogant pre-game trash talk that had annoyingly dominated the media headlines all week long. It was as if she was actively punishing the defense for daring to think they could bully her out of her own game. And what happened in the final, dramatic 2 minutes of regulation would permanently, irreversibly alter the power dynamic between these two franchises for years to come. With the game essentially out of reach, and the scoreboard heavily favoring Indiana, Golden State attempted one last, pathetic, desperate, full-court press. A final, aggressive attempt to salvage some tiny shred of pride in front of their rapidly emptying home arena. But that desperate trap was easily, embarrassingly broken with a lightning-fast behind-the-back dribble that left the primary defender stumbling, followed by a smooth, cold-blooded pull-up jumper from the wing that smoothly kissed the net and sealed the massive victory once and for all. When the final, echoing buzzer finally sounded through the stunned arena, there was no massive, over-the-top celebration from the Indiana side, no arrogant taunting directed at the Golden State bench. Just a quiet, terrifying, business-like confidence of a team that knew exactly what they had just miraculously accomplished. They had knowingly walked into a literal trap specifically designed by front office executives to humiliate them, willingly absorbed the absolute best, most illegal physical punch a highly touted expansion team could possibly throw, and walked out the front door with a dominant, statement win fueled entirely by a 2-2 point. 9. Assist masterclass that no one in the media saw coming. The post-game press conferences in the depths of the arena were incredibly, painfully telling, with Golden State players quietly offering mumbled, hesitant respect, completely abandoning the aggressive, loud bravado they had proudly championed just 24 hours prior. The veteran enforcers who were supposed to physically break her looked utterly exhausted, staring blankly at the stat sheet as reporters asked them where the defensive game plan went wrong. Media analysts on late-night sports shows who had confidently predicted a disastrous, embarrassing night for Indiana were awkwardly forced to eat their words on live television, frantically, desperately rewriting their narratives to accommodate the harsh reality that physical intimidation simply wasn't going to work against this generational talent anymore. This specific performance sent massive, undeniable shockwaves through the rest of the league, proving once and for all that trying to forcefully bully your way to a win against an elite basketball IQ will only get you permanently embarrassed on national television and immortalized in highlight reels for all the wrong reasons. It raises a fascinating, downright terrifying question for every other head coach desperately sitting in a dark film room right now, trying to figure out a new strategy. If you can't beat her with raw speed, and you clearly can't break her spirit with borderline illegal physical intimidation, what exactly is the backup plan? Because right now, looking at the devastation left behind in the Bay Area, it looks like there absolutely isn't one, and the rest of the league should be terrified of what she's going to do next. Everyone thought the league had finally figured out a secret formula to break her, but they were dead wrong, and the entire basketball world was forced to watch their ultimate master plan crumble on live television. Going into this highly anticipated matchup between the Indiana Fever and the WNBA's newest expansion villain, the Golden State Valkyries, the narrative was already written by critics who desperately wanted to see the young phenom fail in front of a sold-out, hostile crowd. The Valkyries were supposed to be the ultimate kryptonite, a franchise armed with a massive billionaire budget, a state-of-the-art facility at the Chase Center, and a roster deliberately stacked with gritty, hardened veterans who carried massive chips on their shoulders. For months leading up to this game, rumors circulated in the dark corners of professional basketball media that front offices across the country were quietly exchanging notes, colluding on the best physical tactics to exhaust, frustrate, and completely neutralize the face of the new generation. But what was meticulously planned as a brutal burial in the Bay Area miraculously transformed into a breathtaking exhibition of resilience, elite playmaking, and sheer willpower, leaving over 18,000 screaming fans in absolute, stunned disbelief. You have to understand the toxic environment she was walking into, because this wasn't just another random Tuesday night game on the regular season schedule. This was a highly calculated, heavily publicized ambush. When the Golden State Valkyries were first announced as the newest expansion franchise, there were immediate whispers about how their front office was building their roster through the draft and free agency. Instead of focusing on flashy, high-volume scorers or building a modern pace and space offense, insider reports suggested their general manager was singularly obsessed with acquiring defensive bruisers. They wanted enforcers who were known for playing deep in the gray areas of the rulebook, players who wouldn't hesitate to deliver a hard elbow away from the ball or set a screen that felt more like a blindside football tackle. The underlying goal was glaringly obvious to anyone paying close attention to the league's changing landscape. They wanted to establish a terrifying defensive dominance early, and what better way to announce their arrival to the rest of the league than by completely shutting down the most talked-about player in basketball history. Players on the Valkyries had subtly hinted in preseason media scrums and podcast appearances that the era of deep threes and uncontested fast breaks